a very small group of people who initiated and made this proposal under the leadership of Choudhuri. In those early days, he was responsible for actually helping with the planning of this institute, the scientific program, and also training young people. Later on, when we moved here, he was the first dean of this institute, and he actually laid the foundation for the administration of the place. Apart from his skills in administration, he was a very accomplished theoretical physicist who had a very strong background in employment. So those of us who have worked with him always marvel at the diligent and the meticulous way in which he used to work. He never tolerated any sloppy mathematics. He was very particular that he should be very precise and clean about that. He worked in a number of fields. Apart from fusion, applied physics, he had interest in space physics, astrophysics, and in frontier areas like magnetic deconnection, one of his favorite topics. So later on, after he retired, he took an early retirement and he went to the US and he worked at the NASA Goddard Space Center for a long time. He continued this kind of work. So in his memory, his family actually donated some funds to PSSI, and we are grateful to PSSI for organizing this event year after year. And the condition was that it should be given, the lecture should be delivered by somebody very eminent in the field. So this year we are very fortunate to have a very eminent astrophysicist among us in the person of Professor Arnab Choudhuri. He is well known to many of you, but those of you who don't know him, he is based in an honorary professor there. He did his early studies in Calcutta. He got his BSc from the Presidential College, Calcutta University, and then obtained his PhD from IIT Kanpur. His master's from IIT Kanpur. And then he got his PhD from the University of Chicago, where he actually worked with Ian Parker. And he continues that legacy of working in solar astrophysics. He has contributed very richly to this field. Like the very famous papers in his name, which have been cited very often. He also invented this model, which he calls the flux transport model for Dynamo, which is one of the most popular models and well accepted models to explain the solar sunspots. I think we will talk about that. After his PhD in Chicago and a postdoctoral stint in Boulder, Colorado, he came back to the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, which is where he has been, and he's with a very nice group around here, and it's actually enriched the entire field of plasma astrophysics in India. We're very grateful to him for that. It's a nice interdisciplinary field between plasma physics and astrophysics. He's been a pioneer of science. He's also a prolific science popularizer who's written many nice scientific books. Also very nice textbooks, which many of you have probably read. They're used widely in many universities all over the world. He also writes very well in Bengali. I've read some of that. He's also greatly interested in the history of science, and that's been his recent passion. And he's really working very diligently towards restoring and informing people about the rich history of Indian science. So we are really delighted that he accepted our invitation. We are very thankful to you, Arnab, and we look forward to his talk today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shane, for inviting me and for the very kind introduction. So it is a great honor for me to give this Professor A.K. Sundaram Memorial Lecture and Professor Sundaram was handpicked by Vikram Sarabhai as one of the 7 members who formed the plasma physics group at PRL, and presumably the third such plasma physics group in India. And Professor Abhijit Sen has written a marvelous account of this history. So at today's lunchtime, I found out that even many faculty members of IPR are not familiar with this article. So I would urge all of you to read this wonderful article by Professor Abhijit Sen, how plasma physics started in India. And I knew 5 of these 7 pioneers personally: A.C. Das, Ram Varma, Binda Bhuti, Pikekau, Abhijit Sen. But I regret that I did not have an opportunity of knowing Professor Sundaram personally. So he shifted from PRL to IPR and then immigrated to US after an early retirement, as Professor Sen mentioned. So perhaps that is the reason why our paths did not cross. So I returned from US and joined IISc around the time when he left for US. So in its honor, today I would like to talk about the 11-year sunspot cycle and how it can be modeled by using a dynamo process, which is called, by using a plasma process, which is called a dynamo process. So let me begin by, is there a pointer, and otherwise I can show my hand. Okay, anyway, then it's okay. So I can move my hand. So, yeah, you don't have no problem. Anyway, so let me begin by showing you how the sunspot number has varied with time during the last 400 years or so. The first entries here after the year 1600 are based on the records left by Galileo and some of his contemporaries who observed sunspots by using the newly discovered telescope. And then there was a period of about 85 years known as Bonded minimum, when the sunspots were not seen at all. But after that, the sunspot number has gone up and down in a roughly periodic manner with an approximate period of 11 years, although you see lots of irregularities. So this cycle was discovered by Schwabe. Okay, yeah, thank you. So this cycle was discovered by Schwabe in 1843, and the first clue about for the physical nature of the cycle came in 1908, when Hale found evidence for Zeeman splitting in the spectrum of a large sunspot, from which he concluded that sunspots are regions of strong magnetic field of about 3000 Gauss. So for those of you who are not so familiar with Gauss, 1 Tesla is equal to 10 to the power 4 Gauss. So this is something about 5,000 times stronger than the magnetic field near geomagnetic poles. And this was a momentous discovery in physics, because this is the first time somebody conclusively established the existence of magnetic fields outside the Earth's environment. And now we know that magnetic fields are ubiquitous in the astrophysical universe. Most stars, planets and galaxies have magnetic fields. And with this discovery, it also became clear that the 11-year sunspot cycle is a magnetic cycle of the sun, presumably produced by some dynamo by some plasma processes. So the first theoretical model of the sunspot cycle due to Parker and then elaborated by Steenbeck, Krause, and Adler is now known as the alpha omega dynamo model. And within the next few years, with more observational data and more theoretical ideas, it became clear that alpha omega dynamo model required serious modifications and extension, which led to a more comprehensive model called the flux transport dynamo model. So I'm lucky that the golden years of growth of this model coincided approximately with my scientific career, and our group was able to make some contributions in the development of this model, which I shall discuss a little later. So here is the plan of the talk. After summarizing the relevant observational data, I shall discuss the theory of sunspot formation, and then I shall come to the flux transport dynamo model and how it explains the periodic features of the cycle. Then at last I shall come to discuss the cause of cycle irregularities and whether we can predict future cycles in advance. So about a decade after Hale's famous discovery of magnetic field in sunspot, so Hale et al. Had another discovery. So often one finds two large sunspots side by side, as you see here, and they found that in such situations, usually the two sunspots have opposite magnetic polarity. If one is a south magnetic polarity, the north the positive magnetic polarity, the other has negative magnetic polarity. So the most plausible explanation for that is there must be some strand of magnetic field underneath the sun's surface, which is poking its nose to the surface in this fashion. So if these two intersections with the surface become the two sunspots, then in one sunspot you have magnetic field lines coming out, making it a positive polarity sunspot, and in another one you have field lines going down, making it a negative polarity sunspot. And now I show you a magnetogram map of the solar disk. So here white and black colors indicate regions of strong positive and negative magnetic polarity on the solar circle, and gray indicates regions where the magnetic field is too weak or below the level of detection. So a sunspot pair of positive and negative polarity would appear as a sort of a white patch and a black patch side by side in this plot. And in this here, in this magnetogram map, you see several such cases. And you may notice that in the northern hemisphere, this white patch or the positive polarity sunspot is to the right, and the black patch or negative polarity sunspot is to the left. And in the southern hemisphere, it is opposite. The negative polarity black sunspot, the black spot, the negative polarity sunspot is on the right and white on the left. So it remains like this for one cycle of 11 years. And if you want to take a magnetogram map 11 years earlier or 11 years later, you will find that the polarity will be reversed. In the northern hemisphere, black or negative polarity sunspot will come to the right, and white or positive polarity sunspot will go to the left, and in the southern hemisphere also it will get reversed. And another thing to note is that if you draw a straight line connecting the centers of these two sunspots in this bipolar pair, you will find that the straight line will be nearly parallel to the sun's equator, but not exactly parallel. There is a small tilt, and that tilt increases with latitude. So sunspot pairs at the higher latitude have larger tilt. So this was discovered by his collaborator Joy. So this fact that sunspot pairs have this tilt and it increases with latitude, that is called Joy's law. So for the time being, if you forget about this tilt, then looking at this polarity distribution of sunspots, you get a feeling that there must be a magnetic field underneath the sun's surface with a structure like this. Then in the northern hemisphere, if this magnetic field comes out, then on this side you would have the field lines coming out in the sunspot, making it a positive polarity sunspot, and in this side field lines going down, making it a negative polarity sunspot. And you see in the northern hemisphere, and in the southern hemisphere also the magnetic field will be produced. Sunspot will be produced from this kind of a magnetic field. So in the jargon of our subject, this sort of magnetic field configuration is called a toroidal field, whereas we believe that the Earth's magnetic field is somewhat like this, and this is called a poloidal field. And the historically famous paper of 1955 Parker suggested that the sunspot cycle is produced by an oscillation between the toroidal and colloidal field. So whether that oscillation really takes place, that would be established only several years later when there are enough observational data for that. So I will mention that colloidal field at the solar surface is much weaker than magnetic field inside sunspots, which are 3000 Gauss, whereas this colloidal field has an average of about 1 Gauss or so. And here is a plot of how the polar field of the sun in that top part, how the polar field of the sun has varied with time. So this solid line is the north polar field, and the dashed line is the south polar field, and below it is a plot of the sunspot number. And keeping in mind that the polar field is a sort of manifestation of the colloidal component, and the sunspots formed from the toroidal component, so it's a manifestation of the toroidal component, to see that really such an oscillation takes place. So it is around at the time when the polar field or the colloidal field is strongest, to find the sunspot number of the toroidal field is the weakest, and the sunspot number of the toroidal field is weakest at the time when the polar field or the colloidal field is weakest. So you really see the kind of oscillation which Parker envisaged more than several decades earlier before it could be established. And let me say a few more words about the colloidal field. On the sun's surface, you would find that the belt of latitude within which this weak colloidal field has a certain sign. And with the progress of the sunspot cycle, this belt moves forward. It looks like this after some time and like this. And this is in contrast to sunspots, which appear at the lower and lower latitudes with the progress of the cycle. So this behavior of both this colloidal field at the surface and the sunspots, they can be represented nicely in this time latitude plot. So here these shaded regions indicate the latitudes where sunspots are seen at a particular time. So you see that with progress of the cycle, sunspots appear at a lower and lower latitude, giving rise to a pattern like a repeated butterfly. It's called a butterfly diagram. And these colors indicate the evolution of the colloidal field in the time latitude plot. So here you see that with the time there is a tendency towards a forward migration. So an aim of any theoretical model of sunspot cycle is to give an explanation of this kind of observational plot. Now, before I come to theory, let me say a few words about the interior of the sun according to what is called the standard solar model. So the energy produced by nuclear fusion at the center of the sun is transported outward up to 0.7 solar radius by radiative transfer, but it turns out that from 0.7 solar radius to the surface, this region of the sun is unstable to convection, and heat is transported there to convection. So sunspots are nothing but regions of magnetic field concentration sitting in this turbulent convection zone. So you may wonder why magnetic fields are concentrated within sunspots like that instead of filling up a much larger volume. So to address that question, we have to look at the subject magnetoconvection, the interaction of magnetic field with convection. The linear theory was first worked out by Chandrasekhar, and then the nonlinear evolution of the system was studied by Weiss and many others. So basic idea is somewhat like this. So suppose you have a particle magnetic field in the plasma heated from below. So the magnetic tension associated with this field lines tries to inhibit convection. So you have to make the temperature gradient sufficiently high to start convection. And if you then start convection, then you find that the space gets separated into two kinds of regions. in some regions magnetic fields are pushed out and convection takes place freely, and in some other regions magnetic fields are bundled up together and magnetic tension suppresses convection in those regions. So tops of these regions become colder and darker, and sunspots are supposed to be such concentrations of magnetic field or magnetic flux tubes where the magnetic field is concentrated or interaction with the surrounding convection, and most probably this magnetic field exists in the form of flux tubes throughout the solar convection zone. And now we know that the sun rotates about this axis approximately the period of 27 days. But unlike the Earth, which rotates like a solid body, the sun has what is called differential rotation, which means that in different regions of the sun, the angular velocities are different. So the equatorial region of the sun has a higher angular velocity compared to the polar regions. And one of the very standard results of MHD is that if you have a magnetic field, then it is frozen in the plasma and it is dragged by this kind of a differential rotation. So we can consider a colloidal field line, and if the equatorial region is moving faster, then that will drag the colloidal field line. So after some time the field lines will look like this. So initially you had only a colloidal field, and now you see that you have got a toroidal field here and there, and in the two hemispheres it has opposite signs. So in parts of this toroidal field were shot up to the surface, then we have bipolar sunspot pairs of opposite polarity in the two hemispheres, as you saw in the magnetogram map. So now let us come to the question where this toroidal inside the sun, where this toroidal field is produced, and why should it float to the surface to produce bipolar sunspot. So one of the remarkable developments in astrophysics in the last few decades has been helioseismology, the study of solar oscillation, and by analyzing this oscillation, it has been possible to produce a map of angular velocity inside the sun. So here is this famous map, and you can see that at the bottom of the convection zone, there is a region where angular velocity changes within a very short distance, and that is the region where the strong toroidal field is produced, and which is often called this tachocline. And by interaction with the convection, the toroidal field in the tachocline presumably exists in the form of a magnetic flux tube. And you expect a pressure balance between the inside and outside of the flux tube. And inside the flux tube, you have a magnetic pressure V squared by 2 along with gas pressure. For pressure balance, you have this kind of an equation. Outside, you have only gas pressure and no magnetic pressure. So this implies that gas pressure inside the flux tube has to be less than gas pressure outside. And under many circumstances, though not always, this implies that the density inside has to be less than density outside. And Archimedes taught us more than 2000 years ago that if you have something with less density compared to the surrounding fluid, then it tends to become buoyant. And this is called magnetic buoyancy, which was again discovered by Arnab. So he also found that magnetic buoyancy is particularly destabilizing within the convection zone, but it can be suppressed to some extent below the bottom of the convection zone. So suppose you have a flux tube at the bottom of the convection zone, of which a part has come within the convection zone. So this part becomes particularly buoyant and rises, while the other part remains somewhat anchored below. And when this part rises, then it gives rise to the reaches the surface, it gives rise to the bipolar sunspot. So to understand the formation of sunspot, we have to study the 3D dynamics of flux tube in the solar convection zone. And some of us were the first to do calculations of this type, and then others joined. So basically, you consider a sort of toroidal flux tube at the bottom of the convection zone where it is produced by differential rotation. And suppose a part of it has come within convection zone, it becomes buoyant and then rises, and we have to study its dynamic. So it is like an initial value problem where you have to specify some initial configuration and initial value of the magnetic field. And at the time when research in this field began, most dynamo theorists told us that magnetic field inside the sun can be at most 10,000 Gauss. So we first did calculations with 10,000 Gauss, but we found that in that case the Coriolis force would be so strong that this rising part of the flux tube would move parallel to the rotation axis and emerge at very high latitude, whereas sunspots are seen at this lower latitude. So only when we made the magnetic field inside the flux tube as strong as 100,000 Gauss, the magnetic waves are sufficiently strong to overcome the Coriolis force and come here where sunspots are seen. So I have talked about this tilt of sunspot where the joyous law. So when these magnetic fields come out to the surface, they have the right kind of tilt. So certainly as the flux tube rises, the Coriolis force due to sun's rotation will act on it, and we will try to reach this as indicated there. And my first PhD student, Silva, we were the first people to study this kind of a dynamic. So this is a figure from our paper. So this straight line here gives the best fit for observational data of Joyce law, how the latitude is how the tilt, even by this gamma, how this tilt is changing with latitude. This is the observational plot of observational Joyce law. And what we did is that we repeated calculation by assuming different values of initial magnetic field. So for a particular value of magnetic field, we would allow a flux tube to start from different latitudes, and when it comes to the surface, we would look at the tilt. So each curve here corresponds to a particular value of initial magnetic field, and for that value of magnetic field, what kind of tilt we get at different latitudes, that's indicated by this curve. And you see that if the magnetic field is, so the values of the magnetic field are indicated here in kilogauss. So if the magnetic field is too weak, then as we saw, pointed out, that Coriolis force drives it to high latitude, and Joyce law is not satisfied at all. On the other hand, if the magnetic fields are too strong, then the magnetic lines is so strong that not much tilt is produced, so much less than the observational data. So only when the magnetic field strength is about 100 kilogauss or 100,000 Gauss, we found that there is a reasonable match between theory and observation. So nearly 3/4 of the discovery after Joyce law. So we were able to give the first theoretical explanation of this important observational law, and at the same time we could put a tight limit on what must be the value of the magnetic field inside the sun, and we shall see that has very important consequences for the dynamo theory. So this paper has been cited more than 500 times according to Google Scholar. So I have given some idea how toroidal field is produced from poloidal field by differential rotation, and then from the toroidal field we get the sunspot pairs and how we explain their properties. So now to complete the cycle, we need some mechanism by which we get the poloidal field, presumably from the toroidal field. And for that, we invoke an idea that's first proposed by Babcock and Lecture. So idea is somewhat like this. Suppose you consider a sort of a bipolar sunspot pair, and suppose the sunspot at the higher latitude has positive polarity and at lower latitude negative polarity. So typical sunspots live for a few weeks. So after this sunspot decay, a more positive polarity magnetic field would spread at higher latitude, and more negative polarity magnetic field would be spread at lower latitude, and that gives rise to the poloidal field. Essentially, this idea is that from toroidal field, these bipolar sunspots form due to magnetic buoyancy, and when they decay, we get the poloidal field. So this back-of-Layton mechanism gives us an idea of how from toroidal field we can get the poloidal field. And for those of you who know something about dynamo theory, I should point out that this mechanism is somewhat different from the original idea of Parker-Stein and Steinbeck-Krauser-Adler, which is called alpha effect, which involves the twisting of the toroidal field by helical turbulence, and that can happen only if the toroidal field is not too strong, less than 10,000 Gauss. That's why many dynamo theorists thought that the strongest magnetic field could be inside the sun could be only 10,000 Gauss. But the simulations suggested that the magnetic field inside the sun is 100,000 Gauss, and then the alpha effect cannot work. So we think that this poloidal field in the sun is produced by this back-of-Layton mechanism. So we can think of working out a minimalistic dynamo model in which the differential rotation takes out the poloidal field to produce the toroidal field, and then by back-of-Layton mechanism, we again, from the toroidal field, we again get back the poloidal field. So the difficulty with this minimalistic model is that when you work out this model, you find that with the progress of the sunspot cycle, sunspots appear at higher and higher latitude, which contradicts observational data that sunspots appear at lower and lower latitude, the progress of the cycle. So we need something else to turn things around. So what would that something be? So in the last few decades, solar astronomers have been aware that there is always a continuous flow of plasma from the equatorial region towards both the poles of the sun. And since we do not want the material to pile up near the poles, so there must be some return flow somewhere underneath the surface to bring back the plasma from the polar regions to the equatorial region again. This meridional, when this meridional circulation was included in dynamo models, that gave promising results. And in fact, we found best results when we assume that the meridional circulation is return flow takes place at the bottom of the convection zone. So for many years, that was an assumption. But within the last few years, neuroseismology has at last established that the return flow is really at the bottom of the convection zone, therefore confirming this conjecture of the solar dynamo theory. And so now I show a cartoon of this like flux transport dynamo model. So here this green indicates the region at the bottom of the convection zone, but the strong differential rotation produces the toroidal field, and these red arrows indicate the magnetic buoyancy due to which the toroidal field rises to the surface to produce the poloidal field. And this brown region near the surface indicates where the back-of-Layton process gives rise to the poloidal field, and these blue contours are the all-important meridional circulation, which is equatorward at the bottom of the convection zone. So the toroidal field produced there is dragged equatorward, and that's why sunspots which form from them appear at lower and lower latitude with the cycle, and the meridional circulation is poleward near the top, where the poloidal field produces is advected poleward, as we see in the observational data. So some of us developed the first 2D models of the flux transport dynamo, although some basic idea was presented on the basis of a 1D model in an earlier paper by Wang, Shilly and Nash. And I mentioned that this paper by Choudhuri, Schussler and Dikpoti, that also has more than 500 citations. Okay, in this talk I decided to avoid equations, but for those of you who want to know what the equations look like, so I have put them in one slide. So we write the magnetic field in this fashion. This is the toroidal component, and the poloidal component comes from this scalar function A. And we write the velocity field like this. This is this angular velocity, and this is the meridional circulation. And since we are doing calculations for the turbulent convection zone, so we have a procedure of averaging over turbulence, something which is theory was developed by Steenbeck, Krauss, and Radler. And when we do this averaging over turbulence, we get a mean field equations of the magnetic field. So there is one equation giving the evolution of the poloidal field, and one equation giving the evolution of the toroidal field. And these are coupled partial differential equations. So not much can be done analytically. So in our group we developed a procedure for solving these equations. And nowadays a publication in Science and Nature is considered often very important. So I will mention that the paper presenting the first results from this course appeared in a paper by Science from Nandini and Choudhuri. And here I show a movie of how the magnetic fields evolve. So on this side you see the evolution of the toroidal field, and here the poloidal field. So the toroidal field is produced at the bottom of the convection zone where there is strong differential rotation, and then due to meridional circulation it is affecting equatorward, and that's why the strong the sunspots which form from the toroidal field appear at lower and lower latitude in the progress of the cycle. And here you see that the poloidal field is produced by wax operator mechanism near the surface, and then it is attracted forward by the forward meridional circulation there. So now I show you a theoretical plot, time latitude plot, which we produced in one of our early papers, and this has to be compared with this observational plot. So here this shaded region is the latitudes where sunspots is seen at a particular time. So these have to be compared with this shaded region, and these contours give these values of poloidal field at the surface in this time latitude plot. So these have to be compared with the colors here. So given the fact that this was about the first effort of modeling this observational plot, hopefully most of you agree that the fit between theory and observation was not too bad. Okay, I have given you some idea of the flux transport dynamo model and how it explains various periodic features of the sunspot cycle. Now let us come to the irregularities of the sunspot cycle, how they arise. The earliest idea was that it is chaos out of the nonlinear terms in the dynamic equations, but later research showed that the most obvious nonlinear term could not give rise to this kind of sustained irregularity. So some of us suggested that maybe stochastic fluctuations present in the system may be crucial for producing this irregularity. And what kind of stochastic fluctuations are there? To address this question, we again take a careful look at the irregularities and try to figure out if there are certain patterns within this irregularity. So again, I show this plot which I had shown sometime earlier, that the evolution of the polar field at the cycle with the sunspot number. And let us see whether some quantities in this plot can be correlated with each other. So one important quantity we can consider is the value of the polar field at the sunspot minimum. Of course, we have two poles, we can take the average of these two. So that gives the polar field at a certain sunspot latitude. And we can try to see whether that has any correlation with the strength of the sunspot cycle, which either comes after it or which came earlier than that. And since we have the data for the polar field at sunspot minima only for some 4 sunspot minima or so, so we would have very few data points in our correlation plot. but still the correlation plots are very revealing. So here is a correlation plot in which we plot this polar field at a sunspot minimum, and against the strength of the next cycle. So in spite of this paucity of data points, it seems that there is a correlation. The other thing we can do is that make a plot of the strength of a transport cycle and against this polar field which comes at the end at the next minimum, and we find that there is not much correlation. So what could be the explanation of that? So we gave this following explanation. So we know that this dynamo involves this oscillation between the toroidal and colloidal field. But suppose the system somehow gets some random peaks at these phases, then what will happen is that colloidal field will be correlated with the toroidal field coming after that, and toroidal field gives rise to the sunspot. So the polar field will be correlated with the sunspot number and the maximum coming after that. As we see in this plot, but if there is this random field, then the toroidal field or the sunspot number will not have any correlation with the colloidal field coming after that. So as we see in this lack of correlations here. So now the question is, what is the physical mechanism producing this random kick? So we discussed that is the colloidal field is produced by this Babcock-Layton mechanism, which involves the tilts of this bipolar region, and is still given by Joy's law. It's an average law. So you see quite a large amount of scatter around the average still given by Joy's law. So here is a plot of the profile of the stills around the average given by Joy's law, and we know that this flux tubes rise to the turbulent convection zone. So this is not surprising that while they rise, they will be buffeted by convection, and that's why there is a scatter produced around the average given by Joy's law. So we realize that is scattered in the tilt angle that will give rise to some randomness in this Babcock-Layton mechanism, and if that produces the random peak, then we get this in the right place, since the Babcock-Layton mechanism produces the colloidal field. So when the colloidal field is produced, we will have random peaks here, and that is exactly what we concluded from observational data also. So our ideas are consistent. And now if we identify these fluctuations in the Babcock-Layton mechanism as a main source of irregularities, then by using this idea, can we model actual sunspot cycles? So if we just run our code without doing anything special, then we get a complete periodic solution. So in order to model actual sunspot, we have to put the information of this random peaks in some manner in our code. And we developed a formalism by which we can extract the information of the random peak from the observational data of the polar magnetic field, and then we can put that in the code. So due to the shortness of time, I shall not be able to describe this mechanism in detail, but let me show the results which we got. So in this plot, the dashed line is the observational plot of how sunspot number varied with time, and it goes up to the year 2006 when we did this theoretical work. And this solid line gives the theoretical values of the sunspot number which we got by putting this sort of a random peaks. And you can see that we were able to model the last 3 cycles reasonably well, and then we continued our simulation, and we found that the cycle 24 would be a rather weak cycle compared to the previous cycle. So our prediction at this time was that the next upcoming cycle, which is counted as cycle 24, would be one of the very weak cycles. So you may want to know whether that prediction turned out to be correct or not. So here I show a lot of transport number for a certain data, and this circle here on this time axis around 2006 is the time when the first efforts were made to predict the next transport cycle of using the flux transport dynamo model. So Moshumi Dikpati, who had worked for her PhD with me, so she went to US and with her American collaborator, she developed a rival code of a dynamo, of the flux transport dynamo, and Dikpati and Gilman predicted that the next transport cycle will be an exceptionally strong cycle and the peak would be somewhere around here. So when I read their paper, I felt that some of their assumptions would not be correct. So we, using a different set of assumptions, so using our dynamo model, we did a calculation, and I will mention that that's one of the authors of this paper, Ji Jiang. She was a Chinese student who was deputed by Chinese Academy of Sciences to do her PhD with me. So anyway, so we predicted that, as I just discussed earlier, that the cycle 24 will be one of the weakest cycles. So according to our calculation, the strength of the peak of the cycle 24 would be around here. And so these predictions were made at this time. And in a few years, when the time came, we saw that the sun hit our prediction almost like a bullseye. So this was the first time in the history of this subject that it was possible to make a successful prediction of the strength of a transport cycle before its onset. And I will mention that okay, so when we did this work, we thought that only source of irregularities is the fluctuation with the back-operator mechanism. But after that, in the next few years, we became aware that there's another source of irregularity, which is fluctuations in meridional circulation. So although we have reliable data of meridional circulation, direct observations only for last 20 or 25 years, we have some indirect evidence how meridional circulation evolved during the past. Because in the flux transport dynamo, the period is determined by the meridional circulation. So period of the dynamo turns out to be about inverse of the meridional circulation speed. And we have data about periods of pulse cycles for more than 2 centuries or so. So here is a plot of this periods of durations of various pulse cycles. And you can see that there are several successive cycles when the period was longer than the average, presumably implying that most probably the meridional circulation was weaker at that time. And then there were several cycles which had periods shorter than the average. Presumably the meridional circulation was faster at that time. So based on such indirect consideration, we think that there have been fluctuations in meridional circulation in the past, and what would be their effect on the dynamo. So suppose the meridional circulation has slowed down due to some reason, so the periods will be longer, so the cycles will be longer, so the diffusion will have more time to act, and that will try to make the cycles weaker. So if the cycle periods are made irregular by fluctuations in meridional circulation, then we expect that longer cycles will be weaker and shorter cycles will be stronger. So is there any observational support of that? So it turns out that in the 19th century, there are lots of variations in cycle period. So here I show a plot of sunspot number during the 19th century, and you can see that that longer cycles like this one or that one, these longer cycles are weaker, and the shorter cycles like this one or that one, the shorter cycles are stronger, as we are suggesting on the basis of our theoretical idea. In fact, many years ago, Waldman noted that stronger cycles rise faster, something what is called Waldman effect, and that is because the stronger cycles have a shorter duration. So based on our ideas, we were able to give a theoretical explanation of this Waldman effect. So keep in mind that there are these two very important sources of irregularities in the solar cycle. So one is the fluctuations in the Babcock-Later mechanism, and another is the fluctuation in meridional circulation. And I will mention that two papers from our group on the subject of solar cycle irregularities were selected as editor suggestion in physical regulators as indicated by this symbol. So first of this paper was a paper in which we made a prediction of the sunspot cycle 24, which I had already discussed. That this prediction turned out to be 7 years later, when the cycle reached the peak, the prediction turned out to be the correct. And in this other paper, we developed a comprehensive model of grand minima, like this bonded minimum in 17th century, when sunspots were not seen for many years, using this fact that irregularities are produced by the combined effect of full fluctuation in Babcock-Later mechanism and in meridional circulation. We developed this model. So since it's a little bit of a technical subject, I don't have time to go into the details of it. So let me just mention that is very unusual for any physics group anywhere in the world to get two papers selected as editor suggestion in PRL within a span of 6 years. So we are really lucky that this happened for our group. And also, as I pointed out, that our this work on earlier work, 2007 work on sunspot cycle prediction, that was done when we did not realize the importance of fluctuations in meridional circulation. So now that we know of such fluctuation, so there is a need for developing the cycle prediction method by combining both fluctuations in Babcock-Later process and in meridional circulation. And that we did a few years ago. And our prediction is that next cycle 24 should be somewhat weak to moderate cycle, not as weak as cycle 24. It's stronger than that, but not too strong. But I may mention that these predictions for this upcoming cycle, which would presumably reach its peak in for 3 years or so. So predictions of different groups diverge widely. So here I show an interesting plot of this showing the predictions from different groups for cycle 24, the first cycle, and the straight line indicates the strength of the first cycle eventually reached. And you can see that our prediction Choudhuri et al. Was banned on this where the straight line is. But there are quite a prediction covered quite a range of values. And this is a similar plot for cycle 25 prediction. And you may think that this divergence is almost as large as the divergence for cycle 24. So the question is, have we learned anything, or we are as much in the dark at that time as we are now? So here I will point out that some of the predictions shown in green color correspond to physical model. The physical model is based on dynamo considerations and some theoretical considerations. So in the case of the previous cycle, even this prediction based on dynamo consideration diverged widely. So here was our prediction, and this Bigfoot and Gilman prediction was that here they predicted the cycle to be much stronger. But in the present cycle, in spite of this divergence, if we look at the prediction in the green, based on more dynamo consideration, you see that those predictions do not have too much of a divergence, and we very much hope that when the next cycle reaches its peak, it will be consistent with the physical models. Okay, so I have discussed various aspects of the flux transfer of the transport cycle and the flux transfer dynamo model to give you an idea of this flavor of the subject. So in the next few minutes, I want to say a few words about certain problems, certain issues which are related to this flux transport dynamo and which have become very important in the last few years. So one is this fact that the solar dynamo reacts back on this meridional circulation. So here is a plot of how the meridional circulation at the surface, the solar surface varies with time, and below is the sunspot number. So you see that the meridional circulation became weakest at the time of the sunspot maximum. So presumably at the time of the sunspot maximum, we have strong magnetic field inside the sun, and this Lorentz force of that magnetic field presumably I think acts back on the meridional circulation and makes it weaker. So we were able to develop a theory of that, and here is the plot from our paper, which can be compared with this observational plot. And I will mention that the theory of meridional circulation is an immensely complicated subject, and any analysis of that requires a considerable amount of calculation. And then many of you may know that about quarter century ago, there was a very famous simulation of geodynamo due to Glatzmeyer and Robert, who were able to model the geomagnetic reversal. And the simulation of solar dynamo is a much more complicated problem than simulating geodynamo. So DNS, a direct numerical simulation of the solar dynamo, first started being reported from around 2010, and within the last few years, many groups have done big simulations of the solar dynamo. So certainly this requires skill and know-how, which I do not have. So I have not got into this field, but some of my last PhD students picked up the skills during their postdoctoral work, and some of them are working in this sort of a dynamo simulation. And here is the structure of magnetic field within the convection zone from one of the simulations. And with many such simulations being carried out, so one question which I often face is that, as I pointed out, that our calculations are based on mean field equation, which are obtained by averaging over turbulence, and they are much easier to handle. So one question we often face is that certainly the kinematic mean field models are historically very important, but now that people are doing large 3D simulation, since it's the case that kinematic mean field models are now obsolete, so I would strongly say that the answer is no. I shall give some of the reasons.
And meridional circulation, they are very important, and we have lots of observational data from helioseismology and other means. So in the kinematic model, we can put this observational data of differential rotation and meridional circulation, and that helps greatly in getting the behavior of the dynamo correctly. But in DNS, we have to, one has to produce this these large scale shows differential rotation and meridional circulation for first principles, and that is a subject of which the basic physics is very complicated and still not understood properly. So unless you get those large scale flows correctly, you don't have any hope of getting the dynamo behavior correctly. And there are other difficulties. So the dimensionless numbers like Reynolds number, magnetic Reynolds number, Rayleigh number, they are off by orders of magnitude compared to what they are in the real sun. And then convection zone is highly stratified with the density varying by several orders over the depth of the convection zone, and the largest and smallest length scale, relevant length scale differ by 10 to the power 4. So this 3D, doing a 3D simulation in which the smallest scales are resolved properly, that is extremely expensive even with the largest computers now. So I would say that because of these things, we are still very far from making realistic models of solar dynamo on the basis of DNA. So far the calculations are more suggestive. So if we want to build more realistic models of various aspects of transport cycle, then we still have to go to kinematic mean field models, where of course we have to tune some parameter, but that also gives us some insight into the physical processes. And lastly, I would say that within the last few years, astronomers have got quite a lot of observational data that many solar-like stars have star spots and they also have their cycles. So one important question is, can we extrapolate the solar dynamo models to these other stars, which are in many cases much more magnetically active than the sun? So I also have done some research on this field, and the answers are still uncertain. So by extrapolating solar dynamo models to the stellar dynamo, we found that we could explain many aspects of observational data quite elegantly, but there are certain aspects of observational data which we so far failed to explain. So it's still an open question whether some of these stars have different kind of dynamos or the exactly the same kind of dynamo as the solar flux transport dynamo. So certainly more research is needed to establish that. And I may advertise my popular science book, in which I have given a non-technical introduction to the phenomenology of transport cycle, and also theoretical ideas to explain it, and introduction to dynamo theory. So if you want to know more about the subject, you can look at the book. And now I shall end by putting the concluding remarks here. So since I have already taken up my time, so let me not read out this concluding remark, but leave them before you to look at. And I shall stop here to answer any questions that you may have. So thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. One of the slides that you saw, that plasma flow on the solar surface 20 meter per second.
Yes.
Is it estimated or measured?
No, it is measured.
So is it the same all over the surface?
Well, no, I think it is the amplitude at the mid latitudes. So yeah, so this is more or less the amplitude at this mid latitudes, and it becomes weaker there. And these were the surface measurements were the first. They were done both by Doppler measurements and the measurements of various features which are carried out by meridional circulation. So as I said, that within the last few years, this meridional circulation has been mapped throughout the convection zone. And since whatever mass flux goes here, the mass flux has to come there, and density is much higher in this region than in that region. So the return flow amplitude has been found to be about 10 times smaller, about 2 meters per second. So it's the flow at mid latitudes here at the surface, that is of the order of 20 meters per second.
There's an online question. How would the observational data from Aditya L1 support your studies on sunspot? Please explain how plays are different from sunspots.
Well, I think I have talked about this dynamo models which is responsible for the generation of the magnetic field. So Aditya L1 data is not very directly connected with this, but it has certainly connections with the consequences of this magnetic field. For example, the magnetic fields produce the hot corona and give rise to coronal mass ejections and things like that, which I have not discussed in this talk. So the Aditya L1, which has 7 payloads, and most of them are dedicated to understanding some of these features, and they are all eventually caused by magnetic field, and the Gano process is the cause of the magnetic field. But Aditya L1 will not directly provide any support or refutation of these Gano models.
I have a question. If I understand correctly, you said that colloidal magnetic field is much weaker than the toroidal magnetic field.
Yes.
So how that, and you said also that the toroidal is generated by the colloidal. So how a smaller magnetic field generates a higher magnetic field?
Okay, that is a very important and insightful question. So thank you for asking it. So, not to make things too complicated, I did not get into too much details of it. So actually what is the case is that I talked about this behavior of this colloidal field, which for many years thought to have very low values, because in the earlier years magnetograms had low resolution. But after people built magnetograms with much higher resolution, it was found that actually this colloidal field is not weak. It's highly intermittent. It exists in the form of small flux tubes, and inside this flux tubes, magnetic field is much stronger, of the order of 1000 Gauss. And since this flux tubes are not resolved in earlier magnetograms and they are distributed, so earlier magnetograms saw that measured only a sort of a magnetic field which is average of that, and that was weak. So actually there are these small flux tubes within which the field is very strong. And this question which you asked, exactly that question I analyzed in one paper written about 20 years ago. So I also involved this idea of that the toroidal flux tube is quite strong in this intermittent flux tubes, and from that I believe that a strong toroidal field produced. Otherwise, if we started from this 1 Gauss magnetic field, then you are right that it would be very difficult or impossible to produce a strong toroidal field. Thank you for raising these questions. I'm glad that you this penetrating thing you noticed.
One curiosity, how do you spot star spots?
Oh, star spots, when with the highest resolution telescopes, they cannot be observed directly. So the way star spots are produced, and even their magnetic fields are measured. So if star spots were of the same size as sunspots, it would be impossible to detect them. So if star spots are much larger than sunspots, then as the star is rotating, the star spot will be coming from this side and goes across the disk of the sun and goes on the other side. So from this side, the star is rotating, so the spectral lines have red shift, and on this side, the star is going this way, so the spectral lines have blue shift. So if there is a star spot coming this way and that way, then when it is coming this way, then the part of the spectral line which has red shift, that gets dim, and when it goes that way, part of the spectrum which has blue shift, that gets dim. So from this sort of indirect thing, the star spots, their sizes and positions, they can be estimated.
They have similar cycles here.
Well, they have, similar, typically of the range of a few years. Of course, that may be an observational artifact, because only around 1960s when Olin Wilson, so you may know his name, so he was the mentor of Goinu Bapu, so from this famous Wilson Bapu effect. So he started this program at Mount Wilson Observatory, so for monitoring the stars which have this magnetic activity that is indicated by certain patterns in the calcium halide emission. So he started monitoring this. So this monitoring program has gone for 30 or 40 years. So if some stars have periods of 100 years or 200 years, the time has not elapsed to detect those periods. So maybe it's an artifact of observational time, but we find that most of the periods are comparable to periods of solar cycle.
Will the Parker solar probe reveal more features of these sunspot?
Yeah, so again, Parker solar probe is as you know that the Parker did this very fundamental work on the dynamo theory, but his most famous work was the prediction of solar wind, and so Parker solar probe is mainly designed to probe what is happening in some of the inner regions of the corona from which the solar wind emanates. So Parker solar probe has already found this evidence that magnetic fields in this region have much larger kings and much more tangled up than what anybody expected, and how it affects the solar wind. That's quite a lot of research is being done. So again, like Aditya L1, I think it deals with magnetic, it mainly studies magnetic field in the upper atmosphere, which is not directly related to the dynamo issue, but certainly these magnetic fields are produced by the dynamo. So if you have more questions, you should probably ask Ovik, who knows more than, from TRL, who knows more than me about this subject.
So there's one more question online. Does the solar cycle, is the solar cycle also concomitant with other instabilities in the sun?
Is what?
Is the solar cycle correlated to any other instabilities on the sun?
The dynamo process itself is a kind of instability. So one can show that from the mathematical theory of imaging, it shows that under certain circumstances, some conditions have to be satisfied. So there has to be some sort of rotation and turbulence. Under such circumstances, if you have a very small seed magnetic field, then that starts growing. So that is the dynamo process, which is the nature of an instability. And people who work on the solar or stellar dynamos, we do not have to bother about this question where the seed field came from. Because if the magnetic field was identically zero, then you would not have any growth of magnetic field, no dynamo. So people who, so one important question in dynamo theory is that from where the initial seed fields came, from which the magnetic fields started growing. So people who work on the solar and scalar dynamo, we usually do not bother about this issue because the stars form from the interstellar medium, and interstellar medium has a magnetic field. So when the stars were born, they already had some magnetic field which would act as a seed. But people who work on the problem of galactic dynamo, for them this question of seed field is a very important question. So we know that many spiral galaxies have magnetic fields. So in order for the dynamo action to take place there, so they require some seed fields, and where the seed fields of the galaxy came from. So this is a question on which there are divergent opinions. You must have heard models of inflation, so there is some idea that first magnetic field was produced during inflation or some other early universe phase. So this is quite a hot research field on which the last one has been said here. So the dynamo process itself is a process of instability.
So as we know that space-time curvature, our sun is situated in that, and you say that it also revolves, and from galactic point of view, it also moves from the center of the galaxy. So what I want to say is that at the surface of sun, there is huge number of charged particles. So there must be extreme electromagnetic fields also there. So quantum electrodynamic corrections like vacuum polarization and all that, when the sun is moving, like rotating and also moving in that field. So those kind of corrections will also take part in deciding these kind of sunspots movements. Because you said about some kind of random tick that you include so that it matches with the predictions and that.
Yeah.
So if somebody is
so I believe that the length scales and time scales are such that this sort of quantum correction are not important in this situation. And similarly, often one wonders whether the general relativistic corrections are needed. So for the Schwarzschild radius for the sun is about 1.5 kilometer. So whereas the size of the sun is 7 into 10 to the power 5 kilometers. So certainly when general relativistic correction are not needed because actual size is much larger than the Schwarzschild radius. About the existence of electromagnetic fields near the sun. So I would say that we all have solved electrostatic problems in which we assume that electric field inside a conductor is zero. That is because there are charges inside the conductor which will move around to screen an electric field. So certainly in a plasma, which is at least in its rest frame, always electric field has to be very small because charged particles can move to screen the electric field. So within these mediums if we go for length scales larger than Debye length and time scales larger than the inverse of plasma oscillation frequency, then electric fields are negligible. But since we do not have magnetic monopoles, at least in sufficient number, so that's why the magnetic fields do not get screened. So that's why in many astrophysical systems we have large-scale magnetic fields, but not large-scale electric fields. So by using this fact that galaxies have large-scale magnetic fields, so Parker was able to make an estimate that even if there are monopoles in the galaxy, there could not be too much in number, otherwise galactic magnetic field would not be transferred. So that is known as Parker limit, and at one time when some particle physics theories suggested the existence of monopoles, this Parker limit was a very important concept discussed quite a lot at that time.
So why I'm saying, because in atomic physics, where for example, if you have like a 90 plus uranium, then you have there's a process called vacuum polarization. So the vacuum itself gets polarized.
So now if we take the sun, such a huge body, and there are so many charged particles, so vacuum polarization must be happening to all kind of particles which are at its periphery. So when it is moving and the vacuum is also getting affected and also rotating, so that's what I am saying. Is there kind of any which you think that?
Yeah, I also don't know. So exactly, some in this room also this vacuum polarization must be taking place. But for most of the calculations like airflow in this room, we don't have to take account of vacuum polarization. So most of us have the feeling that this sort of vacuum polarization, this kind of thing, are not important in the case of the sun. But I think if you feel otherwise, maybe you should try to make some order of magnitude estimate to see whether these are important or not. So I am not sufficiently competent to do this and answer this question in more detail. But most of us think that it's not important, but certainly you are welcome to make some estimates to see whether they will be important or not.
Sir, I have another question, if you allow. This rotation, you said that there is a shear rotation as you move along the elongate.
Yes.
Sorry, latitude. Right? This toroidal rotation has a shear.
Yeah, both in latitude and both in radial direction and in latitude. So let me see where yeah. So here is this famous map of angular velocity inside the sun.
Yeah. So this shear remains constant over time, or it varies. There is one question. And second is that is it that meridional velocity is related to this shear?
Okay, again, these are very important questions. So I discussed that the meridional circulation varies a little bit with the sunspot cycle. So this differential rotation, this angular velocity also varies a little bit with the sunspot cycle at the level of 3%, 4%, something like that. This is called torsional oscillations, and again we believe that it is the Lorentz force of the dynamo generated magnetic field acting on this differential rotation, which is producing this torsional oscillation. So I also have done work on that. And regarding your question about this differential rotation and meridional circulation, certainly the theories of this large-scale flows are very complicated, and in fact we find that these theories are quite a bit interrelated. And in fact, till a few years ago, I also did not know much about this theory, and most people in the community, including even dynamo theory, I found most of them did not know much. So when a few years ago, after I made an effort to learn this theory, I found that it was very difficult to learn because there are no textbook, no papers to discuss the basics systematically. So after learning this subject, I wrote a more or less a comprehensive pedagogical review about this theory. So if you are interested, I can give you the reference. And also, since you raise this question, I may mention that you see that near the solar surface there is a narrow layer where this angular velocity changes quite rapidly. So this lower angular velocity comes in this region just above this higher angular velocity. So this is called a near surface shear layer. So what is the explanation of that? So a couple of years ago, some of us developed a model of this near surface shear layer. And for that model, interestingly, we had to use some equation of meridional circulation, because meridional circulation and differential rotation are intimately connected. So to explain certain features of differential rotation, we had to actually look at the theory of meridional circulation. So since it's a very complicated subject, I don't want to get into the details, but I shall be happy to give you reference to my paper, my review article, that I presented this theory in a pedagogical manner.
And what is the source of this flows?
So ultimately, the energy source comes from the nuclear fusion in the sun, which is causing this convection, and it is the stresses, turbulent stresses in the convection zone, which gives rise to this flow. So again, I think rotation also plays a certain role, because the rotation, these turbulent stresses are of certain nature, and these turbulent stresses drive this large scale flow. So ultimate source of energy is certainly the nuclear fusion.
Is there any other question?
Yeah. So, you have seen the fluctuation in the sunspot cycle using fluctuations in backstop cycle as well as radial cycle. Have you tried ever to check, because in your input equation you have turbulent diffusivity. How about fluctuating turbulent diffusivity? Because this is very natural to think that the turbulence fluctuation may change the fluctuation in the sunspot cycle.
Yeah, this is quite an interesting question. So so we have not done any calculations looking at this this turbulent fluctuation. So of course this fluctuations in turbulent diffusion would be very important only when if there are limited number of convection cells. So certainly we know that near the surface, but the granules are much smaller than the solar radius. So there, I suppose the effects of turbulent fluctuations in different turbulent diffusion will not be too important, but certainly in the interior of the sun, so many simulations suggest that there will be giant cells which are of which are not too many. So in that region, maybe the fluctuation, the turbulent diffusion may be important. So this is still there is no observational support for this giant cell. So whether the giant cells exist or what is the lifetime or what effect they may have on the dynamo, these are still very much open question. So I have so far not looked at this question, but certainly this is an important question.
Sir, I have another question. Can we expect this kind of thing in a tokamak geometry where you have a toroidal field, colloidal field, rotation? So you think that some spots formations can be?
I think you probably know about this tokamaks much more than me. So after listening to this talk, I shall want to hear from you whether these things can happen in tokamak rather than I telling you. And maybe Professor Abhijit Sen can comment more knowledgeably than me.
I will just theory about how you generate currents in the tokamak, which are generated from the fluctuations in the random stress. So it's a bit related to that.
Seems very similar.
So are there any questions? So
Yes.
I have a small question. You mentioned about DNS of solar dynamos. This is very competition is very costly. So anybody tried large scale simulations for to generate those solar dynamos?
I do not know that much about this numerical simulation. So this direct numerical simulation, I think probably Abhijit know more about this large eddy simulations and this direct numerical simulation where people begin from the first principles of image equation. I don't know.
But not DNS
Yes. So these GNS calculations are going on during the last few years, and as I said, there are immense difficulty. So these calculations so far have not been as successful as simulations of geodynamo. So these calculations are still very far from explaining different observational aspects of solar cycle in detail.
okay. there are no more questions, please join me to thank the speaker. So on behalf of PSSI, we thank Professor Choudhuri to come here and deliver the talk. And I thank Paritosh and Professor Sen because they arranged this talk very well. And I thank Dr. Ravi Kumar also so that this can actually be made it online. So I thank all of you to be part of this program. Thank you very much. So I request Professor Sen to give them to. Sir, please come.
Yeah, you are. Oh.